J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge on Sanibel Island is one of America's crown jewels. Among the top destinations in the country to observe wildlife in its natural environment, the refuge enriches visitors' understanding and appreciation of wild places and of the importance of such places. In order to learn more about the refuge itself, identify the area's wildlife, become aware of possible threats to nature, and have an experience to remember, my family and I visited the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge and took a tram tour of the location. To start our day off, we drove across the Sanibel Causeway, down a long, slow-paced road, and arrived at J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge for a 2:30 tram tour provided by Tarpon Bay Explorers. We loaded up on the tram, I took out my notebook and camera, and we were off. Our driver took us on a 4-mile adventure, and the experienced tour guide helped us spot wildlife most visitors would never see. As the road meandered past tidal mudflats and mangrove forest, spoonbills, white ibis, little blue herons, reddish egrets, brown pelicans, osprey, and other colorful birds could be seen feeding and resting. We got the chance to view many other species that make the migratory stopover of Ding Darling part of their annual flight corridor. And no trip on the wildlife drive is complete without stopping by Alligator Curve, where we were able to observe these prehistoric reptiles. At each spotting throughout the ride, the informative naturalist described animal behaviors, special characteristics about the environment, and even the threats posed on the refuge and its inhabitants. To people that are used to fall colors and winter snows, Florida seems like a land without seasons. However, this isn't the case. Dry and wet seasons, rising and falling tides, and even day and night cycles create an ever-changing environment. This is particularly true in the local estuaries that are a main characteristic of the water ecosystem on Sanibel Island. This is where fresh water from rivers mingles with the salt water of the Gulf of Mexico, creating an ecosystem rich with life. Frequent torrential rains mark Florida's summertime when about 70% of the year's total rainfall occurs. During the months of dryness and winter, plants lie dormant and many creatures retreat. Spring brings migrating songbirds that find food and shelter in the estuaries as they travel northward across the continent. Egrets, wood storks, and other birds sprout flowing plumes and brilliant colors in their breeding season. Then, the rookeries become raucous with nests full of young birds. As the temperature rises, manatees leave their warm water winter homes and disperse throughout the estuaries. In the fall, the migrating birds return on their journey south and schools of mullet leave the estuary for the Gulf, where they produce young that will make their way to the estuary when spring returns. Even on a daily basis, estuaries are constantly changing. Around low tide, feeding birds fill the shallows where they pick off tiny fish and crabs left by receding water. When the tide returns, the activity lies under the water's surface, where larger fish hunt for smaller creatures hiding among the seagrasses and mangrove roots. Estuaries are the foundation of the region's ecological health as well as its commercial industries. In fact,
70% of commercial seafood is born and or raised in estuaries. When you go out and have that grouper sandwich, this is where that grouper may have been born, in this estuary right here.
At the mangrove overlook, visitors get a close-up view of the estuary that is so critical to Southwest Florida. A short boardwalk runs through mangrove trees where tree crabs scurry out of sight along the tree's limbs and trunk. It opens to a broad view of the bay. Jumping mullet whack the water in the distance and an osprey circles in search of fish. Mangrove trees are the lifeblood of the estuaries. The leaves they shed create detritus, the base of the food chain. Mangroves also provide shelter where young fish can grow before they venture into the big water of the Gulf of Mexico. These islands become home to a surprising variety of wildlife, and they play critical roles as bird rookeries, providing sheltered nesting habitat out of reach of most land-bound predators. Just imagine what would happen if these beneficial mangroves were to be removed. Our guide told us that mangroves were once removed from Captiva to plant citrus trees. Unfortunately, the island was later hit by a hurricane whose winds ripped out the trees and eroded a trench across the island. Furthermore, as soon as the mangroves were removed, animals started to disappear. Since this tree's network of roots provides a nursery for fish, once the nursery was gone, fish relocated. Then, with no more fish to feed on, birds were no longer seen in the area. They had to find new locations for food. The removal of mangrove trees from Captiva destroyed the soil surrounding the area as well as the habitats for many animals. While venturing on in the field trip, our tour guide described some facts that changed my perception of our local marine environment. She described that variations in water levels, salinity, soil types, and other factors determine the types of plants and wildlife that thrive at each elevation. Lowlands, which harbor hardy leather, fern, and cordgrass, are the domain of the eastern mosquito fish and the anhinga, the snake bird that swims underwater and spears fish with its sharp bill. Myrtle warblers and marsh rabbits thrive on slightly higher ground, where wax myrtle grows. The differences between each system define them, but all are connected and interdependent. There are no lines that separate them, and no one system could fully function without the others. And because the health of each ecosystem affects the others, changes and activities in one habitat can directly affect life in another, especially for wildlife and humans. Transitioning from the fact that everything in the environment is connected, our informant related this concept to the need of some animals to adapt to a changing environment. Since elements in nature have a direct impact on other elements, some may need to change their ways in order to survive. My family and I were informed that as the tide recedes, mudflats in an estuary become a frenzied confusion of wading birds hunting and feeding, but closer inspection reveals an order to the chaos. Each type of bird has its own techniques and specially designed equipment for fishing or hunting, which allow each species to compete successfully for food. Ibises probe the mud with their long, curved bills, while wood storks stir quarry from the muck with a long toe, and spoonbills sweep for meals with their oddly shaped, highly sensitive bills. Green herons use twigs or insects to bait fish. Snowy egret's golden feet are built-in lures. Others, such as night herons and raccoons, dodge the crowds by dining at night. Living in a salty habitat also has resulted in special adaptations, such as salt glands, through which seabirds and reptiles excrete salt, or root systems of red mangroves which filter the salt. This information about specialized behaviors and adaptations for survival reminded me of the concepts covered in Chapter 1 of this class's textbook. A section in Chapter 1 highlights how plants and animals had to evolve in their changing environment. Photosynthetic organisms alter the environment by extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and also by releasing free oxygen, thereby creating today's oxygen-rich atmosphere. Eventually, both plants and animals evolved into forms that could survive on land in this new environment. This information concluded the tram tour at J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. And even though my field trip was over for the day, the experience and knowledge I gained from this tour will follow me for the rest of my life and make me more appreciative of the nature that surrounds us on a daily basis.